Do you have a website, an external presence, employees, an office? Any of these things can be compromised and attacked. How are you defending these assets? Have you penetration tested these public assets? Start 2017 by taking a proactive approach to securing your vulnerable areas. Black Hills Information Security has been helping companies find their weaknesses since 2008. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com and see how they can help you sleep better at night. Welcome back, everyone, to Startup Security Weekly. Michael, I've been thinking about the three books that we talked the most about this year that I'm working my way through. Of course, we mentioned Play Bigger already today. And that's, I think, the one you recommend, Michael, that people start with, Play Bigger. And I recently bought a car, and I was trying to I bought a truck. Speaking, you were talking about pickup trucks in the break. I bought a pickup truck, and then I was applying what I learned from these three books to my car or truck buying experience. And Play Bigger has some interesting aspects that you think about, like what the car manufacturer's category is or subcategory, what the dealership subcategory is, that I think helps you navigate. The Brain Audit is, of course, it's interesting what the salespeople should read, but also have kind of some exposure to already, as I found, like their training, as I did some social engineering, like their training, they walk them through different items in their training, very similar to the pieces of luggage in the Brain Audit. So it's like they've already kind of got that tactic. I think the Brain Audit does a really good job of explaining those things you need, that people need to in order to make the sale. And then the book that I hope no car dealership ever reads is Never Split the Difference. I didn't tell him about that book. I'm like, nope, I'm not even going there, dude. Like, I don't even want you to read that book. That's, of course, the book by the FBI hostage negotiator, which is just really thought-provoking, and I think kind of rounds out books that everyone should read if you're in security, if you're listening to the show and your leadership and innovation and the business side of things. Those three books. And I'll be honest with you, Michael, I really thought that most books about sales were complete bullshit until I started reading your recommendations. And I was like, wow, like what else you got? Like this is great. It like cuts through all the ones that are not worth your time, really, to ones that can help you in so many different ways.
Yep, and thank you for that. And some of these have been recommendations. My friend Philip Casisa sends me some of these. I've found some of my own. Some of my clients have actually recommended stuff to me based on what they're reading. I've got a never-ending list, and I'm currently going back through stuff right now. A couple of you have said, Michael, could you please give us the list of books? Yep. I will. There's some stuff we're going to change in our network in the coming year, and I can promise you right now, minimally, I will post the list. But what I'm almost thinking about is I almost need to do like a book report on it, and we'll make some of that type of stuff available. I got a couple others that I'm reading right now that I think are kind of useful in different capacities, especially looking at leadership and how do we really own some of these problems and move forward with it. So, and that's it too. If those of you have written or written books, let us know about it. I like reading. And if you've read books that you think are useful, that you think your other security leaders, that other startup founders, that other people in this industry need to read, shoot them to us. We'll take a look. And we're going to keep talking to those. So the good news is Sean D'Souza is going to come on the show. Lockhead from Play Bigger said he's not doing any interviews right now. And so unless we can convince him otherwise, we're just going to keep talking about that. And I'm kind of confident, maybe arrogantly so, that we can get Chris Voss on the program. But that'll be a blast. And I think I've said to people before, but if I haven't, let me just go ahead and give some endorsement now for Brain Audit. I've bought more of his resources. I've interacted with him personally. I've joined his community. Worth every penny. Every penny. And I'm going to do the same thing with Chris Voss in the coming year as well, and put some of my dollars and some of my training into some of the things that he's got. And it's absolutely fantastic. Real quick, the way I see it is, Never Split the Difference. It's about the category. So it's about understanding the role that you play in our industry and community. When you get to Brain Audit, it's about saying, so who's my ideal and how do I attract them? So the first 3 of 7 bags are attraction. The next 4 are about overcoming objections and the rejection. It's really getting to the right person. Never Split the Difference then is, so when you're talking to an individual person, the reason he says never split the difference, it's basically about how do you get to what works for everybody. It's not about splitting the difference. It's about getting to the right outcome in that particular situation. And he's got a set of tools. The three books work together phenomenally well. And frankly, they work really well with a lot of the stuff that I do around Straight Talk. So it's been great for me to have things to point to and to amplify. And so trust me, you'll see a lot more of this in the coming year. And you got a pretty cool deal on your truck as a result. So
yeah, and just a resounding endorsement for these three books. They've helped me personally with business, with team interactions in the business. They've helped me communicating our content here on the network. They've helped me submitting CFPs to various conferences. I've applied techniques. They helped me buy my truck. They've also helped me negotiate rent here, where we're located here in Rhode Island, and we're looking at a very positive outcome for that. It was kind of interesting how I used all those techniques from those books and a lot of it came down to value. And I've used Michael's Straight Talk as well, resounding endorsement, Michael. Basically, from my head, just interacting with you as much as we have this year, like wrote out questions that were largely based on your Straight Talk from my head, which is great. And, when it comes down to value, a great example when we talk about rent is, like, I don't care what other people are paying for rent. It could be half, it could be double of what I'm paying. What it's about is my value to you and your value to me. And once I took that approach, like I said, we're looking at a very positive outcome for both parties now. And so definitely the reason I wanted to spend some time on in this segment is, and I know we've got a lot of other things to talk about, but during your break, make sure you listen or read these books, even if you have to take a break from our podcasts to listen to some of these books. They've really helped me in a lot of people in a lot of different ways. And if you're in security today, you're part of a team, you're running a business, you're submitting to conferences, you're presenting. It can help you with all those things. And I just thought that was a really positive thing that I learned this year. That I'm not a big book person either, so I tend to listen to the audio
you listen.
version. So
I find a lot of my friends listen. The other thing I'll point out too, for those of you that listen or those of you who do it Kindle, you do Kindle Audible combinations, and I have not had a lot of time to test this, but some of the research I'm reading suggests that if you read and listen at the same time, you actually increase your retention pretty significantly. Lastly, on this, I'm always happy to talk about these books. If you need to, reach out to us. I've always wondered, like, could we put together some sort of like a book club or something? I don't even know what that would look like, but I'm just throwing it out there as a kick it around idea. We'll figure it out. And one quick note too, some of the work that I've done with a couple of my clients in the last quarter, it was really interesting because I'll just a quick insight, and I'll share some of this with people. In fact, we'll figure out a way. I will figure out a way to get some of this distilled down, because here's the thing. So Straight Talk starts with the value proposition. Straight Talk's got 5 questions, right? What problem are you trying to solve? What value does the solution create? What's the impact of the solution? How do you measure it? And are we ready? And so for those of you that have trained with me, I've reordered it a little bit to be able to do that. So what the interesting thing is, the value prop stuff is those first 3 questions. And that second question is value. What's interesting is I created a tool a couple years ago called the 5 lenses of value. And I basically looked at the 5 basic ways that business creates value. And then I said, and there's these 3 apertures of emotion, logic, and finance, which it's funny because my nickname oftentimes is Santa. And so people went, it's Elf. Well, of course, Santa has elves, right? So it was like, okay, great. But here's the funny thing. I've inverted it, Paul. And so I'm actually going to spend some time on our break better wrapping that up for people, because what I've talked to a bunch of teams is I said, just by thinking about value in terms of emotion, logic, and finance, most people look at value and they just go right to price, they go right to cost, they go right to numbers. But if you stop for a second, you look at the logical or the emotional elements to it, and you know that you can separate value that way. So I've basically inverted it. We won't call it the 5 lenses of value anymore. I've got to rethink the whole process, except for we start with that first. And if you get stuck, then I've got 5 ways to help you get unstuck across emotion, logic, and finance. So if you're listening to this now, let me give you the leg up in terms of where you're going to go next year and some of the updates that you'll see in terms of the Straight Talk framework. When you're looking at value, always break it into the emotional, the logical, and the financial. And frankly, if you have to choose, always choose emotion first and finance last. If you get the emotional appeal right, the people will help you build the logical, and they'll help you build the financial. You just got to get the emotional appeal right. And Paul, it sounds like you did. So awesome stuff.
if you want to see an example of this in action, Michael and all of our listeners and subscribers, I went through with John Strand and we spent 45 minutes talking about penetration testing. I asked, what problem does it solve? What's the value? How do you measure success? What's the impact of a penetration test on the organization? When are people ready? And then I threw in like a segment at the end where we actually talked about some very different and innovative solutions. And my question was like, what are some of the trends and or technology related to penetration testing that can really help organizations? Talk about that innovation piece. So like not really knowing it, I use Straight Talk, Michael. And if you want to see that executed, the state of penetration testing is our first on-demand webcast series. It's been recorded and will be available in January at securityweekly.com/on-demand.
Yeah, and what's great about that series as we transition to some of these articles and discussions is it's a slightly different format. So, this is driven by our role to curate. I know some of you will laugh when I say that because it's a word I've really enjoyed for a long time. But part of what I think our role is at this network is to go through and look at things and then to curate stuff up. And so what I'm loving about the on-demand program that we're putting together is it's looking at top issues, and then it's bringing people a state of the state. It's giving them insight, no fluff and no BS, just the way it is. And then we're giving you some vendors and some partners that we like. We're letting them air their point of view on that problem or their perspective. And when you take all of it into consideration, I think what you're going to find is you've really armed yourself for success in the coming year. That's our goal. And so obviously we look forward to those types of discussions. And of course, we'll keep bringing you our articles and our discussions around things that are useful as well as the news. Right. So this show is always going to have a different flavor of the news. But this first one I really love, Disagree and Commit. So I swear we're going to have to figure out how to get Tomas on the program because his writing is just absolutely phenomenal. It's short, it's to the point. It's another great one to read. He talks about the fact that this is gaining a lot of influence at Amazon, but before that it was Andy Grove at Intel, and before that it was Peter Drucker. And the idea is disagree and commit. So the first step, so it's two parts, right? First step, disagree, like demand that people voice their disagreement with you. It doesn't mean play devil's advocate. It doesn't mean disagree because they disagree. What it means is if you're in a meeting with your teammates, with your colleagues, and somebody doesn't agree with you, you've got to create that safe, we've talked about this in the last couple episodes, psychological safety. They need to feel comfortable that it's okay to disagree with you, and you need to make it okay for them to disagree with you. That way, once all the opinions are aired on the table, then you can step two, commit. Once a decision is made, even if it's not the decision that you wanted, you don't agree with it, it doesn't match up with what you thought, but it's the decision, you commit to executing it. You commit to it and you make it work. And what we find is the teams that there are teams that do none of this. It's all sabotage, right? I call it the boomerang effect, and you guys have all experienced this. You've been in a meeting and somebody says, okay, sounds good. 3 days later, I've changed my mind. Why? I didn't really like it anymore. And what happens is that kind of stuff creates all this toxicity. So there are people who disagree, but then don't commit. There's people who don't disagree and then commit, kind of, but then not really. And so really, it's a cultural shift. And Tomas has got some recommendations as to where it doesn't really work, but for the most part, it's more of that mindset of, are you allowing people to express their opinions and viewpoints? And then when you reach a decision, is it communicated clearly and is everybody on board? Yeah, move forward with it. I mean, personally, I like that environment. What do you think, Paul?
It just reminds me of developing personas in the workplace and in various roles over the years, because we established we're old now. We used to call them pigeons, the people that used to disagree with everything in every meeting that you were at just for the sake of disagreeing, or because largely they didn't want to do work, or they just took great pleasure in just disagreeing just for the sake of disagreeing. And we called them pigeons. And because they'd come to the meeting, they'd shit all over everything, and then they'd leave.
I love it. That's
and that article reminded me of one of the personas that I developed across my career.
Oh, that's really funny.
So hopefully that article can help you learn how to deal with the pigeon effect.
All right, so this next one, it's a Harvard Business Review, and they've been on a tear lately. So you're going to see this coming up. You're going to see different articles coming up in the next couple episodes, and I try to space them out. And there's a couple reasons for that. One, I never like to throw too much attention to any one source or publication. The other thing is too, if you're not a Harvard Business Review subscriber, they only give you a certain amount of free articles per month. So I'm trying to make sure that nobody exceeds that. This one I liked a lot. Here's why. It obviously was looking at startup founders. And basically the premise was, is it better to be a business person who tries to do something technical or a technical founder who can then hire for business success? And I looked at that and I went, you know what? We're dealing with this in security today. Paul, how many times, even on our network, have we had the discussion or perhaps even a debate about, does the CISO need to be technical or can they be business? Or how does it all work out? And so I think there's some relevance here to wherever you are. But here's the interesting thing too: if you're on the startup side of it, founders always talk about the importance of a team, and the investors always talk about the importance of a team. Well, here's why. And basically, the bottom line of all of this is, it's better to be technically oriented and then augment yourself with the business stuff. That it's easier to teach. In fact, I'm not gonna say it's easier to teach, because I've actually often thought, to be candid, if you give me somebody with the right aptitude, like they know how to communicate, they can problem solve, they've got good curiosity, I can teach them security. So I think there's some of this, but what their argument here was, if you're already a founder, so let's say you're a team leader and you're instinctive on that, then you probably have a pretty good grasp on business, or at least you're better than average. And if you then also have technical skills, you tend to separate yourself out fast, and you're willing to hire and augment for those potential business skills. And I thought, oh, that's really interesting. But let me tell you where I've seen it starting to happen. I've talked to a number of CISOs in the last year that have said, well, you know what? I hired teachers to help me better communicate and teach the people around me the things that we were doing. I hired people that were business analysts to better understand what our portfolio needed to look like. I hired people that were former financial analysts to do a better sense of modeling, blah, blah. And so what I'm starting to find is exactly this, Paul. Some of the CISOs that are doing really well, they're still pretty technically minded, but they had a decent business sense. And now they're staffing out their team with people who can do those traditional business functions. And it's giving them the ability to run their team better, make better cases, do better outreach. It's essentially like they're raising better funds just inside the enterprise. So I don't think this would really go counter to anything you and I have thought about, but any surprises here for you?
No, none whatsoever. And I think, one of the elements of a successful business and or team is recognizing what skills you need and filling out that team or business with the right people that have those skills to help you achieve your goals. So I think this is pretty good common sense in terms of business. And I think it can be used by a lot of different people. If you're on a security team and you're hiring, really evaluate what skills you need and the diversity of the skills that you need. And there's some technical skills you're going to need to build, but there's other skills as well that you're going to want to round out your team with. And that's super important.
All right. So this next one, I put it together. 5 CTA secretly sabotaging your sales emails and what to use instead. I don't know why this loads funny on, at least for me, but so CTA is a call to action. This has been interesting because we've talked about this a little bit here on our network in terms of the way that we're emailing people. But I got to tell you, I see this constantly. I see this in the pitches that we take. I see this in client emails. I see this everywhere. So CTA is a call to action. And it's often used as a marketing term, but here's the thing. It's not. The world is busy these days. So what we're going to talk about when we talk to Sean D'Souza is, what's the next step? What's the step you want someone to take? By the way, right, and what I talk about in Straight Talk is it's the best next step. What is the best next step? It's not steps. It's not all the 37 things you need to do. In fact, there's a quick aside, but completely related to this. If you go start studying brain science and mindset and healthy mindset and competitor mindset and different stuff like that, what we've started to learn is that, so let's say, Paul, you do a particular task. And you're new at it. You didn't do it great. I can come at you and say, well, Paul, you really screwed that up and you did these 19 things wrong. So just think about them and do better next time. And you probably don't. Mm-hmm. Or I can say, okay, good. I like that you did that. All right, I want you to focus on this one thing. Take a deep breath before you do this, right? Or try this, or visualize this, or say whatever. And then when you get that one thing, go, great. All right, here's the next thing we're going to work on. And then here's the next thing. And then here's the next thing. And so instead of tearing you down, I'm acknowledging where you're at. I'm giving you one thing to focus on, and I'm moving you forward. What we find is that works out really well. Well, so if you're sending emails to somebody and they're not responding, or you're trying to get buy-in for your project, or you're trying to get somebody to close a deal, or whatever it is, we see these mistakes all the time. And so they list out a couple of them. Here's the worst. There's no call to action at all. And the second worst is the unfocused, like, okay, so you can give me a call or just respond back if you got any questions, or you could use my link below and schedule time with me, or you could just hit me up on social media, or, maybe I'll see, like, oh, stop.
Yeah, it's like, what do you want me to do? What? Yeah.
Too much.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the thing is, it's so counterintuitive to a lot of people. By giving me more options, you actually make me less inclined to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
Like people are like, if I give you all the options, you'll pick the one you like. Nope. I'm just going to shut down, move on.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a bunch in here. I mean, Paul, did you see any that you wanted to call out that you thought were interesting, or?
No, I just, on your previous point, I think it's interesting is not to force people to have to think about it too much. Right? You want to kind of not force them, but guide them into the next step. And I think that's important.
Look, if it doesn't fit for them, they'll self-select out of it. By the way, they were going to self-select out of it anyway. Paul, to your point, it just means do some work ahead of time. Think it through and say, when somebody gets done reading this, what do I want them to do? Which actually means the first question you have to ask yourself is, why am I writing this? Mm-hmm. Why am I writing this? Why am I writing this? What do they need to know? What do I expect them to do as a result of reading this? And did I make that clear to them? And are they prepared to be able to do that? That's it. But and I made that sound really simple. It's obviously not simple, but those of you that have been on some of these crazy ass email chains and these reply to all chains that just make you want to bash your head into the desk, yeah, that's why. And so you can fix that. All right, pitching. I feel, Paul, like it's been so long. And actually, for old time's sake, we were bringing up Silicon Valley quotes and stuff in our break there. But so this is from Appster. And I really like this. So it's long. So this is worth going and checking out. And it's worth going and checking out if you're internal just as much if you're a startup. And here's why. It's telling you how do you pitch your app, right? So it's really just basically saying, how do you pitch to investors? And what I really like is there's a ton of detail in here. They did a very detailed breakdown and analysis of it all. And then they said, okay, here's the 10 essentials. And what I loved instantly was it starts out, question 1, what's the problem you're trying to solve? Question 2, what value do you create by solving the problem? And I went, well, all right, I like you already. But then I started thinking about it too, right? If you're an internal team today, what's one of your big challenges? How do I get funds? How do I get the budget to go do the stuff I want? How do I get the funding to add headcount? How do I get the tools that I want? How do I get the space to breathe that we want? And when you go look at this, they broke it down into 3 phases. And I'm telling you right now, because I do this internally, it fits. You got to have a pitch deck, then you establish communication, then you do your live presentation. And they had a stat, and it was like basically most people, like in 3 seconds or less, like they skim your pitch deck and they decide on the snap, yep, okay, I'll deal with them, or no, I won't.
Yeah.
And
and for that reason, Michael, the graphic here says the step 1 is your introduction, and step 2 is your team, and step 3 is the problem. I don't agree with that. I agree with you. Your problem should be first, and you should tie the team directly into your problem. Like as soon as you define that problem, and you see this on Shark Tank all the time. They define the problem first, like, have you ever, been somewhere and then this has been a problem for you, and get people to identify the problem. And then you say, yeah, I'm really close to this problem because of X, Y, and Z. And so you transition from the problem into introducing your team. John Strand and I do this with offensive countermeasures. We say the problem is other security solutions are, doing X, Y, and Z, or you lack visibility in this area, define the problem. And then we say, yeah, we're tied to this problem because of our experiences and background. And so we tie those together, which I think is a better approach.
I like that too. Because I find a lot of times people, like, they want to lead with what I call the brag board, right? These are all the companies. And it's like we talked on, I think, the last episode or two. We've had 16 quarters of a consecutive growth of 100% or more and blah, blah. Yeah, guys, I don't really care. I'm sorry, what problem do you solve? And do I have that problem? And do you solve it in a way that creates value for me and it doesn't have a negative impact for my organization? When you can answer those 3 questions for me and I go, how do you do that? Yeah, man, tell me about your team. Tell me about your solution. Like, now get into it with me and build up that credibility and authority. Yes. So I agree with you on that. But what I liked about this in particular was, and to be fair, my initial instinct was, Start with a pitch deck. No. And then I thought, you know what? Well, hold on. People like SlideShare stuff. And one of the trends I've seen in the last decade is we went from just like issuing proposals to we gave what I'd call a visual proposal. Like you'd use PowerPoint or, Keynote, your favorite visual editor, and I'm giving you pictures and images and a lot of white space and a lot less words, and you can like flip through it fast and go, oh, yep, okay, cool, yeah, I'll talk to you guys.
As long as it's not Prezi, I'm cool with it.
Yeah, you and me both. Look, you and I are complete lockstep on this stuff. But what I like about this is it's basically saying you've got to have a way to get their attention to have them go, okay, and then you establish those communications and you can keep getting them excited about the problem and your solution or what you think a solution is. And then you get that chance to actually present to them. And so I thought it was good. Anytime somebody's got an evidential breakdown, I like it because it gives us something to look at, even when they get it wrong. And Paul and I are right. So take our advice with their evidence, and I think you're in really good shape. And then TAM, we got to talk about TAM. And here's why, because we mock it a lot. So TAM, that's your total addressable market. This is the Shark Tank question that says, how big is your market? And they go, well, everybody. It's got to be where there are 8 billion people, 8 billion. And the eyes roll accordingly. Here's where this gets kind of interesting, by the way, right? So here's inside baseball for the security space. We keep talking about all these unicorns, right? So these are the billion-dollar valued companies. And what happens is a lot of investors get excited about that. And yeah, we have a number in security. But when people are looking at total addressable market in security, if you told me that my total addressable market might be worth $200 million a year, that's actually a pretty good market for the security space. And you and I, Paul, were trying to figure out how big the security market actually is. And I keep forgetting, I don't know, billions, billions of dollars.
11 billion, 17 billion, 20 billion, 50
400 billion to times
like,
two.
It's billions.
It's something.
Multiple
The
billions.
only one I always remember is everybody cries that cybercrime's 450 billion, which is 1.35% of our total global traffic, which basically means it's not even a rounding error. But anyway, what they did was they said, look, here's the thing then. If you want to understand your total addressable market, that's telling me if investing this is a good enough outcome. Now, let me just flip this around again. You're a security leader today, and you're trying to figure out what you're going to get done in 2018, and you want to go back to the executive team, and you want to make a pitch for a potential product. In fact, let me make a sub point on this. A lot of folks will say, well, I don't have a budget line item for that. I'm not going to go ask for it. Every time I've worked with a CFO, a board of directors, and an executive team, I have every time asked them, do you want your executive, do you want your tech folks, do you want your security guys, do you want your security team coming and asking you for more stuff, even if it's not in the budget? They have never told me no. What they've always said is, have them make the case. It's my job to decide yes or no. Let them make the case. Okay, cool. So that said, if you're going to go make the case, and this is going to only work for a small fraction of a small problem for a small part of the organization, it's not a good investment. But if the total addressable market internally it works for every employee, I'm probably going to roll my eyes. But if you can get down to the point where you can show me how it's going to impact a large population in a pretty positive way, you've got to get somebody's attention. So a lot of times, and we're going to do more of this in 2018 where we're looking at these things, a lot of the stuff that benefits founders and startups and vendors absolutely applies when you're on the business side of things too. It also shows, if you're a founder, you understand the market and how it fits. If you're a security leader, it shows you understand the company and how the solution is going to fit. That's a big deal. And then they got 3 basic ways. You can go top down. And it's funny because they did not like this at all. They basically said that's when Gartner declares it to be something. And they're like, look, Gartner's smart, but whatever. Like, we don't like that. Bottom up basically says you go to everybody and you figure out what people are willing to pay for it. You figure out what the value of it's worth. You calculate it by X number of people. And they said, look, we like these analyses when they're done right. And the value theory basically says you figure out how much value you can create and capture, and you come back to us. And they said, look, that's obviously tricky. And I'm going to tell you again, go back, just use ELF, right? Emotion, logic, and financial. If you can figure some of that out, I think you're putting yourself in good shape. So anyway, it's good. Again, it's another long one that talks about how do you put together your total addressable market. But it's one of those things where people are like, oh, well, why do I need to care? I'm solving a problem. No, there's hundreds of problems to be able to solve. You need to solve the problems that create the largest amount of positive lift in your organization today. So whether that's if you're a founder trying to get capital, you're a vendor or a startup trying to get traction in the marketplace, or you're a security leader or a business leader, and you're trying to make an investment that the rest of the organization will recognize, total addressable market actually is a pretty good concept for you to know.
So you ready for a statistic that from a couple of different sources? I don't know how reputable they all are, but basically 2017, the cybersecurity market is 120 billion, roughly.
120 billion.
From my quick research.
So you Googled that?
Yeah, I Googled it. Yeah. Statistica, I don't know, Statistica was one, and CSO Online was the other resource that both put it in 2017 at around 120 billion.
120 billion. So, and that's interesting then. I guess that's why people are losing their minds at 450 billion lost to cybercrime. But just by the way, right, the reason I brought that up is that the total estimated economy is somewhere around $80 trillion US dollars. So if you tell me 450 billion out of 80 trillion, you're under 1.5%. In retail, there's this concept called shrinkage, which is a really clever way of saying loss and theft. And so if you run a retail business, you're expecting some number of things will be lost, damaged, and stolen. And if you can keep that percentage low enough, and when I started in this business, it was like 5 or 6%, which frankly was kind of like having, full employments. When I was studying economics, full employment was 96%. Now it's 95%. It's the same kind of a concept. They were doing backflips this earlier part of this year. They got global shrinkage down to 1.53% or 1.38%. I mean, it's kind of unheard of, to be fair. And they were like, wow, look at how awesome we are. And our number's lower, and we're beating ourselves up saying we're screwed. What's going to happen to us? Guys, no. You know what? Let's end the year on a positive note. We in security are kicking ass. I know it seems like sometimes people aren't paying attention. I know it seems like they're not always getting excited. But the numbers, the real numbers, yeah, you're doing a great job. So, you matter. Like, this is a good week to, we're coming up a good time to like get some downtime, take a deep breath and reset. But you know what? You're doing a good job. And you're going to keep doing a good job. That's kind of this idea behind Steve Case, Rise of the Rest. So I don't know if you saw this, Paul. Steve Case, he was a former founder of AOL. He's, basically got himself a big RV or a bus. He drives around the country, but he stays away from like Boston, D.C., Atlanta, Austin, Silicon Valley. He goes to the rest, and he does the bus tour and the pitch fest, like these pitch competitions. And he just raised a $150 million fund. And his point was, you don't have to be in one of these big cities to be a startup and to be successful. And so he's got a bunch of big names behind it. And then he said, look, we're not just going to give you funding, we're going to give you mentorship. And I think this is a theme you and I have talked about. If you got a good idea, start it. If you've got a good team around you, build it. Don't worry about where you live. Just go do good. And if you're doing good by solving a problem and creating value, and you need money, there are people that will invest in you. There are people that will support you. I think the landscape has shifted that you don't have to be in one of these city centers. And that's kind of what I took from this. And I thought that was kind of nice. Did you see it differently or have anything to add?
I did not.
Okay. All right. So last week we talked about Gemalto, and Atos made an unsolicited bid for them. And I want to say they bid like 4 billion, 4.3 billion, somewhere in that range. And we talked about it briefly, and it turns out Thales came in, and they made the bid for 4.8 billion. And they said, yes, we like it. And by the way, so I didn't really know a lot about Thales. I think I've come across them over the years, to be fair, with some of their identity management stuff. And they're a provider of security systems, but they do aerospace and defense. And if you look at Gemalto and you look at Gemalto's smart card and their ID card business, I think there's a nice fit to it. There's a nice dovetail, and there's some history with all of these companies. So it's going to be kind of curious to see how that falls out. But these are not small takeovers and acquisitions and mergers. Like there's big, and I think you're going to see more. But so anyway, that's the only real update I had on that. Did you have more insights?
No.
Yeah, I didn't either. All right, Amazon to acquire Squirrel for $40 million. This Axios broke this, so I threw their link up. There are a bunch of others that have since reported on it. Squirrel, since August 2012, they've raised about $26.5 million for rounds. It's rumored that they're in active discussions with Amazon. Why it got leaked is kind of shocking to me. That it got leaked is kind of shocking to me. They're putting the potential purchase price a little north of $40 million. So it's frankly not like a great exit. It just is. Not really sure what to think about that. So I don't know, Paul. I mean, this is a space that obviously you understand pretty well. What do you think?
I think that the what we've termed as threat hunting has undergone a lot of changes, and I think it's a kind of a squandered category. And a lot of pivots are being made in the kind of threat hunting space. I think it was big for a while. Squirrel is a good company. I will say that. Everyone I've met from Squirrel has been super nice, super smart, and very much has given back to the community with resources on threat hunting. So, I mean, if Amazon is going to buy them, I'm happy for them. I hope it's a good exit for them. I think they're a good company. I think they're solving some problems for people. I don't really have any more insights into the deal, other than it is in fact a rumor. So.
Yeah. I don't know if it was fair to report on the rumor or not, but since so many people are reporting on it, and it's the end of the year, so it's one of those things that's kind of interesting. I don't know. I threw it up there.
Well, and I think we're going to see companies like Amazon buying up security companies and integrating into the environment. I don't think it's going to be a complete collapse like some people are like, all security companies are going to get swallowed up. I think there's going to be a lot of smart acquisitions. I think this is a smart acquisition for Amazon.
Yeah, and we're going to see more of it, right? I mean, one of the things we keep talking about and why this is still going to be important from a business perspective is the R&D in the security industry today is the startup space. And when we look at the startups that get traction, we look at the startups that are able to define their problems better or be more innovative or get to market and build that traction, they're going to have exits. And the exits are not going to be unicorns, IPOs. The exits for a lot of these folks are going to be acquisitions. That there's no shame in that. That's awesome. And so we're going to keep paying attention to it. All right. So this one I thought was kind of interesting. Conversant.
Yep.
25 million. It was an equity/unattributed round. And I looked them up. They've got about $75 million, a little under $75 million. I didn't count them up. You go look at their fundraising history. It's like they have an A round, a B round, a C round. They have a couple convertible rounds. They have a debt round. They have a bunch of equity rounds. It's like, wow. They're in ethics and compliance. They're a SaaS-based program. Now, here's the thing. 25 million at the end of this year tells me that either they had some surprises at the end of their year they needed to cover, or they're looking at some really rapid expansion in the coming year, and they're gearing up for it. 25 million for a SaaS company, it's not a lot of money. So again, like I don't know this company. I didn't know a lot about what to read out of it. Raising 75 million. Also for a SaaS company, not a crazy amount of money. So it's just one of those, okay, there's some movement still here at the end of the year.
Well, I think their big competitor is Coalfire, and I think they're trying to catch up.
Yes. So. And the Coalfire is listed as their biggest competitor. Yeah. All right, and then the last one, I thought this was interesting because this broke this morning. ADT filed for an IPO. Here's why I'm interested in it. First of all, the speculation, and I put this up from the people who did the analysis. They're suggesting it could raise $1.5 billion. So not a small IPO. And think about what we've talked about in the last couple of weeks about ADT. They've gone out and they've started buying MSSPs, and they're at, frankly, that forefront of converging what's predominantly been outsourced physical security, and now they're looking at detection and response on the cyber side. And I get it. Some people don't like that word, but you're going to have to learn. So wait a minute. So they were private equity backed about a year or so ago, and now they've started to make these pretty interesting acquisitions, and they're already saying, yep, we're going to go public again. We're going to raise $1.5 billion. Pay attention to what they do. Definitely pay attention. This is going to be very interesting to see what ADT does, but I'm, I got the popcorn out. I think it's going to be cool. And I think it's going to be cool. I think this convergence is a long time coming, and it's going to be neat to see how it starts to play out in the marketplace overall. So those are the big ones for the week, Paul.
Fantastic. Well, this is the last podcast of the year.
It's the end of the year. I know. Now I'm a little sad.
I'm sad. I know. Well, I can't wait to get back in this seat, specifically in 2018. We've got a lot of cool things planned. I'm super excited. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. We'll see you next time. See you next year.